Hello everybody, Cody here. With The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom refreshing my love for Zelda, I decided to dive into some of the older games from my childhood and relive the adventures. The staple games of my childhood were The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time, and The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. The thing I love the most about games like Zelda, Dark Souls, or even shows like Dragon Ball is that they lead to endless speculation. And for those of us who like a solid conclusion to a game, these games linger in the back of our minds for years to come, wondering what the truth really is. While playing through this time, I noticed several things and created a theory to make everything make sense, at least to me. What I came up with, I believe, is the darkest Zelda theory that you've never heard. This story suggests that nothing happens outside of the worlds of Hyrule and Termina related to the lore of these two games. So sit back, grab some popcorn, and prepare yourself for the tragic truth of the Hero of Time, and finally tie this whole story together. This story is full of loops, turns, and twisted corridors, much like that of the Forest Temple. This is just my theory, and while it's probably full of holes, please be courteous, as it took me lots of time and mental energy to create. This is technically the first YouTube video I've ever made. Please listen until the very end and enjoy. The theory goes as follows. Once upon a time, in ancient times, within the vast forest of Hyrule was a lone researcher who had heard rumors of sightings of a mythical creature known as a Keaton. However, after exploring most of the forests in Hyrule, he has no luck whatsoever of finding a Keaton. He returns to his home in Hyrule Castle empty-handed as usual and decides to himself that there's only one direction left in the forest that he hasn't traveled, and that tomorrow he would go there and finally put the legend to rest. So the following morning, he awakens, feeling fully energized, tells his wife and two children he will soon return, and begins heading southwest of Hyrule Castle. The man researched a variety of different things, but anything paranormal or mythical specifically intrigued him. The man looked high and low, marking his path as usual along the way so he wouldn't get lost. Eventually, after seemingly searching every inch of the forest, nightfall began to set in quickly. So the man began setting up a tent. He got a fire going and began eating the meal his wife had prepared for him ahead of time. Just as he was about to take the second bite of his meal, he heard the crack of thunder, and the wind became still, when suddenly it began downpouring, and a very strong storm had rolled in. His tent was not fully assembled yet, and wasn't meant to withstand a storm like the one that he was dealing with. So he quickly decides to search for shelter, when he noticed a large opening in one of the nearby trees that he didn't notice earlier, either because it was too dark or because the hole was pretty high up in the tree. The man managed to jump from a nearby tree stump, as it was very dark inside the tree. However, he was not expecting the tree to be as hollow as it was, and ended up falling pretty far down into the tree, which left him severely injured. The man quickly realized that he had been trapped within the tree and didn't know how to escape. The man struggled for hours trying to climb the tree, but each time he would slip, further injuring himself. He quickly began to accept his fate, as it was apparent to him that he would never escape. There was a small pond of water at the bottom of the tree that the man would drink from to stay hydrated. However, after approaching the third day without anything to eat, his body began consuming his muscle for energy, and his wound became so bad because it was left untreated that it was apparent that the man would be dead by the end of the third day. Out of a final act of desperation, he began pleading with the goddesses to save him, although nothing seemed to be working. The man remembers all of the people he cared about and all of his favorite memories before closing his eyes one last time. Hours pass by, and when the man opens his eyes, he realizes he is back outside the tree, and it's early morning. The man stands to his feet, realizing he is no longer injured. The man questions if he's dead or if it was all a dream, before realizing that it was definitely real because he had a scar where his wound was. He makes the decision to return home, completely amazed by what had just occurred. After a long adventure home, the man can't wait to tell his family about what had just happened. But to his surprise, just as he walked into his home, his children were upset and said that their mom had become incredibly sick. They also seemed to believe that the man was only gone for one full day. Over the next 2 days, Her illness seems to just keep getting worse and worse, and the medics don't know what to do to help her. It's gotten so bad that the man decides to gather his things, his horses, and his family, and head back to the tree that seemingly cured him, in hopes that it will perform another miracle. The man sets up a rope and assists his wife into the tree. He then begs the goddesses to please heal his wife. He tells her to get to sleep, and he will be outside setting up camp in the meantime. A few hours had passed, and the man hears a sound coming from within the tree, a sound he's never heard before. He says, "I knew it. I knew the tree could heal her." He rushes down in excitement, only to realize that his wife is now missing, and there's something on the ground where she was. As he approached the object on the ground, he realized what it was. It was a mask of his wife. He picked up the mask in his anguish and noticed that it felt like real flesh. He became terrified of whatever entity seemed to dwell within this tree, and decides that he's going to find a way to get his wife back, with a different musical melody that he will create, as the sound he heard coming from the tree just before seeing his wife as a mask was none other than the Song of Healing. He thought he could reverse the effects of the curse by playing the song he heard, only backwards. The song played when playing the Song of Healing backwards is what we later know as Saria's song. In order to achieve this, he needed musical instruments, which he returned to Hyrule to receive after setting up camp in the woods. After returning and realizing that nothing was happening when he played the song backwards, he decided that it wasn't loud enough, as the song he heard come from the tree was much louder than the instrument he could let out. He made several trips between Hyrule and the forest in order to build a home, and after several months of building, it was complete. The home was designed with giant musical horns on top that could be heard from miles away, so he began playing the sound of Saria's song as loud as he could, repeatedly. At the same time as music began filling the forest, a group of 5 children, consisting of 4 sisters and 1 boy, who happened to be playing in the woods, had heard the music coming from deeper within the forest, and decided that they were going to check it out. They venture to where the sound is coming from, and decide to knock on the door of this home that seems to be filling the forest with joy. They are met with 2 children consisting of 1 boy and 1 girl, who were painting on the home. The children all seemed to know each other, as they were roughly the same age, and had played together in Hyrule months ago. The man returns home soon after, who was still panicking inside. The man puts on a happy face and decided to teach these children the song on musical instruments, so they too could assist in returning his wife to normal. After a while of playing the song, the man became furious that nothing seemed to be working, and told the children that he'd return home shortly, as there was plenty of time left in the day. The man's son insists on going with his father, which his father allowed, and the 2 of them set off towards the location of the tree. It was then that the daughter of the man began discussing to the other kids that their father has gone completely insane, and that he believes he can revive his dead wife. She then points to a coffin in the corner of the room and mentions that it was meant for her mother if she were to have passed away naturally. A few hours pass by, and the kids decide it's about time that they head home, as they have been waiting for quite a while to make sure that the father and brother return home before leaving this girl here alone. They say their goodbyes and tell the girl that they will return tomorrow to play and keep her company. Just as they were about to set out, a man bursts through the door. He has a crazed look in his eyes, and he's screaming at the top of his lungs. In his arms is what looks like the son who had left and went with him, only it's completely mummified. The man has also become incredibly disfigured, and is halfway mummified himself. The children all begin to panic as they realize that he's still transforming into something. They end up combining their effort to push the man into the coffin and close it. The children, all incredibly freaked out at this point, decide that as much as they want to stay and help this poor girl, it's time to leave, and tell her that they will come back with help as soon as possible. They invite her to join them, but she wants to stay with her father. The 5 children set out on their way back out of the forest. However, they notice that it's beginning to get dark, and it's going to be difficult to navigate the forest. Regardless, they begin following the ribbons that the man had placed on the trees in order to not get lost. They follow the ribbons one by one, heading in the same direction, until one of the kids notices that the music is getting louder again, and it's as if they got turned around at some point. After turning around again and walking in the opposite direction, they again hear the music getting louder. It's apparent at this point that the children are completely lost, with their only guide being the music from the music box house. They decide that the best thing to do is to return to the house until morning, when they can more easily navigate the forest. However, every time they seem to be approaching where the music is coming from, while following the banners along the way, they're met face to face with the tree. It was as if the house never existed. The children decide to rest for the night and would find their way home in the morning. Night passes, and none of the children slept well. They are awoken in the morning by the sound of a bush shuffling around, and one of the kids being struck by a deku seed, which was fit by a nearby deku shrub, which nobody has ever seen until this day. When they see the deku shrub seems to be laughing at them and playing with them, they decide to chase it until they notice it disappeared into the ground. What exactly was going on here, thought the kids, as they seen more crazy things in the past 24 hours than they had ever seen before. Regardless of what they've seen, they had to get home, as their parents would be worried sick by now. They begin their adventure back home for the second time, when much like the night before, they can't seem to escape the music, and it appears that they're going in circles. They're beginning to grow hungry, and are going to have to find a way to survive by themselves until they could find their way home. Several days had passed, and the children had found a good water source and a safe tree to eat from. They eventually realized that there was no way out of the forest, and accepted that they had become lost in the woods, and started making the best of it. They carved masks, which they would wear all the time, and had a great time playing with each other for the most part, although they missed their families and wished they could find the poor girl. One day, the boy in the group was off by himself and started playing his musical instrument, following along with the melody of the forest. It was right then that he was confronted by a ghost, who revealed himself to be somebody named Goms. Goms carried a large scythe which depicted a stall kid. He had a cloak of bats that surrounded him, and a menacing smile on his face. Goms then begins explaining to the boy that the man who last visited the tree had created him, as a spirit of undeath. He had also created a great Deku tree, which was a spirit of life. When the angry man demanded for a longer life for everybody within the forest, which would turn him into a creature in which could never die. This entity in question uses magical songs that differ based on the wish. It seems you're able to speak to me by playing the Song of the Forest, which was given power due to the man's wish. The boy is completely terrified of Goms, but he manages to ask him the question, "Can you lead me out of the forest, please?" In which Goms agrees to do. He begins traveling with the boy and shows him the way out of the forest. He thinks to himself that he went this way before, but it led in circles last time. However, it now seemed to have led to the initial spot that the children were playing before hearing the music from the music box house. This path will lead you from which you came. If you ever wish to end this curse, seek me out with that melody again, and I will show you how, for there is no consequence for knowledge. And just like that, Goms disappears. The boy, now knowing how to escape the forest, eagerly returns to his friends at the base of the tree and tells them that he found the way out and they could all return home. The kids decide to keep everything they've learned a secret and to tell their parents that they all just got lost in the woods. This was to prevent any more damage from the tree, at which point they believed was haunted. The children all return to their homes and are met by a very concerned community. As it would turn out, the boy's parents had traveled deep into the forest in search of the missing kids. However, they haven't returned yet. Shortly after the children returned home, a small survey crew was sent out by Hyrule to search for the boys' parents, to notify them that their son had returned home. The boy had known of the forest's curse now, and became very concerned about his parents' well-being. All of the children got plenty of rest that night, except for the boy who met Goms. He couldn't help but to wonder what Goms meant about ending the forest curse. This boy kept imagining the poor girl stuck in the house with her Gibdo father and dead brother, having recently lost her mother as well. He also knew his parents were searching for him. It is at this point he begins his plan to rescue the girl, his parents, and destroy the evil force within the tree, which seemed to be the cause of all of this havoc. The next morning, he sets off back to the forest with his musical instrument and his heart-shaped mask. Once he arrived at the base of the tree, he began playing the melody of the forest, in which Goms had reappeared just as he promised. This time, before Goms could get any words out, the boy asks him several questions. What did you mean by there's no consequence for knowledge? What is your reason to end the curse? Wouldn't you cease to exist? Why did you help me yesterday? Where are my parents? Asks the boy. Goms replies, the entity cannot bargain for simply asking questions, while if you make a wish, an equally bad outcome will also come true in this world. The bargain for knowledge would be something as simple as forgetting something you already know, so as the man's death being put onto his wife instead. My reason to end the curse is simply my revenge. I was created with the soul of that man, so I carry the anger he once carried. I will not cease to exist if our plan ends up working. I helped you because I know you will help me. I sense a great destiny within you. Your parents have become part of the forest's curse, as any adults who enter the forest are bound to become Stalfos. Any more questions before you proceed? The boy shakes his head, puts on his mask, and climbs to the entrance of the tree, and with a deep breath he travels down to the bottom of the hollowed out tree, using the rope left behind from the previous man. The boy notices that there's a small wooden object in the center of the tree, with a mask depicting a woman nailed to it. Little did the boy know this was the mask of the wife of the man who once visited the tree. In an attempt to properly present the mask to the entity, the man nailed it to a totem pole and stood it up on the ground here. The boy began asking a series of questions, while knowing he would forget something each time. He asks, how do the consequences of the entity work? Who are you? Can Goms be trusted? What exactly is the curse on the forest? How can I end the curse? Without actually hearing a voice reply, he seemed to have knowledge of all the questions he had asked. He didn't know what he had forgotten in trade, but one thing he did notice is that he had forgotten his own name. The boy then returned home with all of his new information and rounded up the 4 girls he had originally found the music box house with. And after a brief discussion and agreement between all of them, the children put on their masks and grabbed their musical instruments. The group then set out for the tree. The boy told them the effects of the forest curse and how anybody who enters the forest will become lost, and over time will become a Stalfos if they're an adult, or Skull Kids if they're children. While on the way, he tells them that he has a plan to end it, but they just need to trust him. He knew the 4 girls to have good hearts and trusted them with a very important task in his plan. They soon arrive at the tree. The boy begins by making a wish. He first wished for an alternative world to Hyrule to be created, which was accessible through the means of the mask he was wearing. With the new world being created, the boy noticed that the mask was now stuck to his face, as he couldn't remove it. He decided to make a second entrance to his new world at the bottom of the tree, which he and his friends then created and spent days drawing on the walls of the twisted entrance for fun. Meanwhile, the boy carefully decided on his second wish. He began exploring his newly created world and decided to test his boundaries in the new world, which was known as Termina. In this world, the entity that created it took the form of four giants, creating mountains, the sea, and giving it order. It appeared that everybody that the boy could remember, even though he's forgotten many of them, have appeared in this world, though they don't recognize him. The boy began playing tricks on the people and causing havoc within Clocktown, which was where the entrance to Termina seemed to lead to. To the boy's surprise, the four giants had come to the call of the townsfolk and banished the boy to the moon. He could still access Hyrule, but he could no longer use the world he'd wished for, and needed to find a way around this to further his plans. He had the tribe members create several masks made of mud, which looked exactly like the face of the Redeads we know later. They also created an altar for where they spoke to the deity as a sign of appreciation. For the boy's second wish, he puts power into these masks, which would make the wearer completely mindless and obedient, which would be required later. This second wish had no immediate repercussions, as the masks now have power, but were neither used for good or evil yet. However, the cost of using these masks would be the boy's soul when used. The boy asks a few more questions at this time, which causes him to forget more about himself. How can the Redead created by these masks be stopped? If things go wrong, how can we undo them? At this point, the tribe decides to have each member of the tribe make one wish before he makes his final wishes. Each sister was to trade their physical bodies to learn a song from the entity, each having a different purpose in the boy's plan. Each sister did as planned and were given torches to represent the song they had learned. One sister was given an orange flamed torch, which represents the sun song. One was given a blue flame, which represents the song of time. One was given a purple torch, which represents the song of healing. And the last sister was given a green torch, which represents the minute of the forest. The boy then wished for nobody to discover the secrets of Termina on their own. Thus, a temple was formed, deep within the lost forest, with twisted corridors, a linear path leading to it, in order to single out invaders, protected by a maze of loyal Deku shrub, which seemed to look at Goms and the Deku Tree as their masters. They often would visit and pray to the Skull Mask, which they refer to as the Sacred Forest Totem, before losing track of its location as it's been hidden beneath the temple, which was only accessible through the assistance of the Four Sisters. The Song of Time, if used by the boy, would return him to a time in which the tree was still intact, before there was ever a temple there. The Deku Shrub seemed to know that the totem caused their existence, and praised it because of this. All of the measures were taken in order to protect the secrets of the entity within. By this point, the boy had completely taken on the form of a demonic entity, which shared the color patterns of the mask he once wore. It was clear to the sisters that the entity had done this to their friend. So, in a desperate attempt to save their friend, they decided to play the Song of Healing, hoping it would soothe his spirit, just as the boy had asked them to do beforehand. This turned the boy into a mask. The sisters, remembering what the boy had told them before they began making wishes, decide to remain hidden within the temple, within four paintings, after hiding all of the masks in the secret lower chamber, hoping to never be found and forced to open the secret room. The songs taught by the entity were inscribed on various stones around the temple, and their true powers eventually were lost to time, as nobody knew what they meant. The only people who came close to cracking the code, years later, were two brothers named Sharp and Flat. They worked for the King of Hyrule, but would often visit the Forest Temple in hopes of discovering the truth of these melodies. I'll refer to them as the Composer Brothers later. This is the quote on the tombstone that the Sun Song was inscribed into. The rising sun will eventually set, a newborn's life will fade. From sun to moon, moon to sun, give peace to the living dead. Restless souls wander where they don't belong. Bring them calm with the sun song. This suggests that a newborn's life is potentially taken each time the song is played, and that it was intended to be used against the Redeads. I also want to mention that the older of the composer brothers, Sharp, was the only person throughout Link's whole adventure outside of the Kokiri Forest who believed to recognize him. He says, "Huh, you again?" Then mentions that he shares distinct features with Princess Zelda, suggesting they may be related in some way. He also tends to believe that Link is a member of the royal family, which I will get back to later. Zelda is a fast moving game where you hardly know the first thing about a boss or NPC before saving or killing them. Therefore, I'm trying to take everything as literal as possible and assume it was put there for us as a clue to put the story together. Anyhow, the reason I mention the composer brothers is because they are very important to this theory, as you will see later, but I'll get back to them in a little bit. Generations later, Link's parents, who were guardians of the King of Hyrule and any kingdom in need of assistance, were wearing their curse-resistant green armor sets as they've been assisting the Deku Tree in clearing out some of the enemies that were beginning to overtake the forest, when they managed to stumble upon the now abandoned Forest Temple, which was the home of the Deku King and Deku Queen, who ended up selling Link's parents the deed, packing up their bags, and taking a hike. After a brief exploration, they returned to Hyrule with news of the mysterious fortress, which may hold secrets of the past within. The King of Hyrule, at the time, had a younger brother who was just as qualified, if not more, to rule himself. So it was decided that the Forest Temple would be ruled by the younger brother, accompanied by some of Hyrule's greatest forces, the Sheikah, which included Link's parents. Link's parents primarily served the Sheikah, whose goal at the time was to be Hyrule's watchful eye and report any signs of rebellion amongst the great nations, but would answer to the call of any nation that needed assistance. Clothing was made in certain nations that would provide resistance to either the forest curse, volcanoes' heat, or breathing underwater, designed specifically to fit Link's parents, for they would be the first responders to any danger. One day, the mask's evil power began to resonate from deep within the temple, sensing a small portion of hatred within the king of the forest. It began whispering to him, "Please help me. I was once consumed by evil, but now I wish nothing more than to end the curse on our people. Gather the four sisters from those particular paintings we've had for generations and light the flames. Free me, and the curse on our forest will be lifted." The king does as he's asked, and Link's parents assisted the king in defeating the four sisters. Sure enough, an elevator, only large enough for one person at a time, appeared out of the center of the main room. The king heads down the elevator. Here he finds a puzzle, which leads to what looks like an altar surrounded by 6 symbols of the Triforce, very similar to the Sage's Summit in the Temple of Time. This is where the ancient tribe would speak to the entity. A mask is sealed away in the center. As the king approaches the mask, the voices begin speaking more loudly. "Your brother stole your destiny as guardian of the sacred realm. You were always better for the job, yet they chose him. Destroy them and claim your destiny." The king had a strong will, though, and begins to see the mask for what it truly was, an evil artifact that should stay contained. He denied helping it and began his way out of the chamber when he was confronted by Goms, the death god of the forest and holder of the secrets to the cursed forest. Goms had been the one speaking to the king, luring him into his trap. Goms easily defeats the king, as he can only be defeated with light arrows, and brings him to the mask. Now face to face with the mask, staring intently into its eyes, the mask latches on to the king, pulling out the darkness within his heart. He could feel the power coursing through him. It was said that in Termina, at this very moment, a darkness emerged into the world of Termina and began turning the entirety of Ikana Canyon into undead creatures, which was full of people who resided in the memories of the current king and the children. Meanwhile, Link's parents were celebrating the first birthday of their new son. The powers within the mask have awakened at long last, and with the knowledge from the king's memories about the Triforce, immediately decides to create 6 paintings with the power of the entity, having access to some of the mask's memory, which is known to bend space and time. The The paintings led directly to the gates of Hyrule Castle, specifically at nighttime, in which the Re-Deads could fight. The king declared war on Hyrule, equipping all of his soldiers with a Re-Dead mask, which caused them to be very hostile and obedient to him, and sent his entire army through the six paintings, thus bringing about the war over the Sacred Realm. Now I want to go off the rails for a moment to mention that when the mask gets a hold of the Skull Kid, the evil actions performed are the evil thoughts in Skull Kid's childlike head being brought to the surface, which came off as mischievous to say the least, which is what kids are. I believe this to be the case with all of its wearers, suggesting that somebody more intelligent like a king that may have had a tragic event in the past, such as with Hyrule, and while normally able to contain these feelings, the mask again brings them to the surface, inspiring an instant assault. Anyways, while on the battlefield in Hyrule Castle, as soldiers were dying namelessly, Link's father, being the greatest swordsman in all of Hyrule and right hand of the king, demanded that the king stop sending soldiers to die for no reason, as he and his wife refused to wear the Re-Dead's masks after seeing its effects. The king refused to listen, and a battle broke out between the king and Link's parents. Link's parents, although they fought admirably, were being beaten by the king. During this time, Hyrule began calling in reinforcements from all four great nations: the Zora, the Gorons, the Gerudos, and themselves. The king dealt a critical blow to Link's father, and as he laid bleeding out, he can hear his wife fighting with everything she had. It was at this point that Link's father realizes that he was not the best swordsman in Hyrule, as his wife was a much more formidable foe to the king, as she held her own for much longer than he did. Perhaps this was due to her newly born son's fate hanging in the balance. Regardless, the king manages to deal a critical blow to Link's mother before deciding to leave them alive and continue his attack on Hyrule, as there was a small part of him that still treasured the duo as dear friends. The king begins turning citizens of Hyrule into masks, as he knows how terrible a fate that it is. He manages to turn quite a few people into masks during this time. The king's means of turning people into masks was far different from the way the Song of Healing turned him into a mask. When Majora turned people to masks, they took the shape of what they loved the most. A person who loved eating was turned into a pig mask. A person who dreamed of flying was turned into a bird mask. A person who loved running was turned into a rabbit mask. A person who admired the Great Fairy was turned into a Great Fairy mask. A person who loved cows was turned into a cow's mask. A person who loved dancing was turned into a dancer's mask. A person who loved bombs was turned into a bomb mask. A person who loved their child was turned into a child mask. The captain of his own army was turned into a captain's mask when he proved too weak to do serious damage to Hyrule. A person who seeked answers was turned into a mask of truth. A person who loved being out at night was turned into a night mask. A person who dreamed of having a big destiny was turned into a giant's mask. A person who loved hiding became a stone mask. A person who loved the idea of mythical creatures became a Keaton mask. A man who loved frogs became a frog mask. A Garo soldier was turned into the Garro's mask. A postman who loved his job was turned into a postman's hat. A man who loved hosting the circus was turned into the circus leader's mask. A couple who loved each other were turned into the couple's mask, as they were inseparable even while Majora attacked the city. And finally, a man who was mesmerized when he met a Gibdo and became obsessed with them was turned into a Gibdo mask. During this time, while everybody was turned to masks, Link's father, with every ounce of strength he had left, stands to his feet one last time, demanding that he and his wife return through the painting and find their son. They manage to make it back to the temple. While both of their wounds are severe, Link's father's wounds were extremely fatal, and he barely clings to life. Link's father now lays on the altar which was used to speak to deities. It was here that a powerful melody began playing, seemingly coming from the altar. Link's father also hears a voice during this time. Play this melody, and I will claim the soul I was promised with your physical body. Link's father, without wasting any time, reveals the fairy's ocarina that was given to him by the great Deku Tree for his bravery of always keeping the forest safe. Link's father plays the melody, and a stone statue of himself appears in the center of the altar. Link's father makes a request to his wife before they say their goodbyes. She takes the fairy's ocarina from the deity's hands, which has taken over Link's father's body, finds her son, exits the forest temple, while notifying the four sisters as Link's father had asked, as it was only a matter of time before Hyrule storms the temple. During this time, in the dark dimension of Termina, four great giants began moving from the four corners of the zone towards the darkness that had recently spawned. Link's mother makes her way through the forest, baby in hand, having a fond memory of the path due to her time as a soldier. In an instant, the fierce deity, now in flesh form while taking the image of Link's father, explodes through the portal with immense strength and goes straight for the Mad King, faster than lightning itself, they say. As the battle rages on, the fierce deity, being in complete control of the battle, cuts the king directly in half. To everybody's surprise, both halves were still alive and well. Hyrule, in a completely powerless state, as the two deities clash in the skies above them, decide to evacuate the town. The battle continues until Hyrule has been completely evacuated, by which time the four sisters have heard from Link's mother and arrived at Hyrule to perform their destiny and play the Sun Song, followed by the Song of Healing, which stunned all of the Re-Dead in the area, as they cannot fight during the day with the Sun Song, and the Song of Healing turning the Mad King and the fierce deity into masks. The giants in Termina at the exact same time have reached the darkness in the middle, and like the four sisters, sealed the darkness away. As the sisters gathered, all of the masks now spread across Hyrule, they perform one final ritual, trapping all of the spirits from the masks into Majora's Mask, before returning it to the Forest Temple and sealing it away. They used the minute of the forest to travel back quickly. Rumors say that a child emerged from the rubble after the battle, seemingly uninjured. The reason for this is because while the mask was a full-fleshed demon in ancient times, he was turned into a mask with the Song of Healing that needed a host, as previously mentioned. Therefore, when the Song of Healing was performed this time, instead of turning the man and the mask into a mask, a person was released, as it was trapped within the mask. Rumors say that there was a small internal conflict within Majora to determine which soul would be freed in the process. Many soldiers died in Hyrule Field who cannot pass on to the next life, as they were killed by the mask and are now part of Gom's Curse of Undeath. Those would be the Stall Kids in Hyrule Field. Anyhow, Link's mother barely made it to the Deku Tree before passing away. As she handed off her son, her final wish was that he'd have his father's courage one day. The Deku Tree then looked her in the eyes and said, "There was a fairy fountain on the way here. I put it there myself. What the fuck?" No. I believe Link's parents are represented in Majora's Mask as the Ego's servants, and the Ego's king represents the king of the forest, as I believe in the memory theory of Majora's Mask, where the only people who appear in Termina are those within the memories of the humans who enter. A quote from Aegis Duokana: "My servants died namelessly to the light that guides you." I believe the light that guides you is referring to Hyrule, meaning, in my theory, they died to the hands of Hyrule. The Re-Dead who were attacking Hyrule, along with Majora, were members of the Sheikah and couldn't die because of the effects of the masks, so they were put in Kakariko Graveyard, where they could forever roam. Now I'd like to get into some evidence I have supporting any of this, as well as my own beliefs, before diving back into it. First and foremost, the curses. It is said that the Lost Woods are cursed, and with all the Stall Kids in Hyrule Field, I think it's easy to make the connection of curses and undeath with Goms, as his scythe depicts a Stall Kid, and is one of the last enemies faced in Majora's Mask, and is the last mini-boss faced in Majora's Mask, suggesting he only appears as a last resort. Furthermore, Ikana Valley is the cursed area in Majora's Mask that has to do with undeath. I believe it is a reflection of the Lost Woods, and the Stone Tower Temple is a reflection of the Forest Temple. Both dungeons involve flipping it upside down to complete certain areas. We find Goms, the Composer Brothers, the Four Sisters, Egos Duokana, and his servants in the Stone Tower, which lead to many questions, like why are the Four Sisters and the Composer Brothers here of all places, and what exactly is Goms? If you consider the theory after hearing the rest, this will make sense. Deku shrubs are enemies constantly fought by Link throughout the game. I believe Deku shrubs actually liked Majora and the Kokiri because they were products of the Deku tree and helped protect children much like fairies. One thing they all seem to do when defeated is call Link their master. It's speculated that when you defeat them, you're their new master. I don't believe this to be the case. I believe they truly do look at Link as a master, and the spit attack they do is more or less just them playing. Something interesting to note is the Deku shrub inside the Deku tree that tells you his brother's secret password, 231, asks Link, "Do you think I'm a traitor?" I always look at this as, "Do you think I betrayed the Deku tree or my brothers?" Which is a dumb question, because yes. However, if you look at it in the context of, "Did I betray Goms by defending the Deku tree?" It's not so dumb of a question. They also believe you to be the sacred forest totem if you approach them in the skull mask, which is apparently just the forest temple entrance. The Deku shrubs in the child timeline, which is closer to the war, heavily guard the forest temple from potential intruders. If you show the Dekus the Mask of Truth, it plays Hyrule Castle theme when Link's sneaking past the guards. Maybe this shows that they were guardians of Hylians. The memories. Whether they're from Lynx, Skull Kids, or the Happy Mask Salesmans, every single person in Termina is somebody they've met in Hyrule, excluding the giants and main bosses, for the sake of not killing bosses from Ocarina of Time again. Every friendly NPC is from Hyrule, with a few explainable exceptions, and most of the mini bosses as well. There are 8 mini bosses in the game not seen during Ocarina of Time, but I have theories explaining these. The theory is that Link bumped into these 8 bosses in Hyrule before the events of Majora's Mask. It's important to this theory to consider the tools Link had in Termina. While he had the basic tools he found as a child, there was no sign of most of the tools he gathered as an adult. The only exceptions to this are the hero's bow with all 3 elements, bombs, the Eye of Truth, and the hook shot. There's no Goron hammer, no long shot, no Pegasus boots, no iron boots, resistance clothing, Goron bracers, silver gauntlets, gills, etc. This is because Zelda sent Link back to a time in which he didn't ever collect these tools. I believe the King of the Forest Temple and Link's parents are represented by Egos Duokana and the Ego Servants, and are only in this world because the Happy Mask Salesman remembers them through the King, which I will get back to. Some of the evidence I have to support the theory that Link was sent back to before collecting these items is that at the beginning of Majora's Mask, Zelda is shown giving Link the Ocarina of Time and teaches him the Song of Time. While any reasonable person would simply sum this up as a way to get the song into the game, I had to deep dive into this one. The theory goes that to Link, everything felt like a dream after Zelda played the Song of Time and sent him back to the past, as it was a different means of time travel than simply returning the Master Sword. He could remember tiny bits and fragments of the future, enough to verify that Ganondorf does intend on taking over the world, but not enough to remember every detail, such as the Song of Time. He also struggled remembering how he became heat resistant or was able to break or lift large stones or breathe underwater. Therefore, these abilities were implemented through the 3 transformation masks. If you watch closely during the credits of Ocarina of Time, you'll notice that it briefly shows the altar where the 3 spiritual stones should be placed after Link has returned to his original time. However, they aren't there. This got me thinking. Zelda is also in her castle peering out the window at Ganondorf during the final scene of the game, not fleeing from Ganondorf with Impa like she should be if this were after Link had gathered all 3 spiritual stones. For what I'm about to say next, I must first point to a period of time in the game Skyward Sword, where there were 2 Zeldas at a point. After Zelda falls from the sky, another Zelda can actually be seen behind Impa, trapped in a crystal, suggesting that depending on the means of time travel, 2 of the same person can in fact exist in the same time. Now what if I told you that for a brief time there were 2 Links in Hyrule? When Zelda sent Link back in time using the Song of Time, which was a different method of time travel than returning the Master Sword, he met with Zelda, who was surprised to see Link back so soon, as Link had just visited her, except with Navi, as her prophecy had stated. Let me further explain, as this leads to tons of questions. I think what happened here was that Link, having just been returned to the past by Zelda and watching Navi fly off, explains to Zelda about the future, at which point she probably thinks the first Link either disappeared or should be left to fulfill his duty as normal. Navi flew out of the Temple of Time and possibly met with Link, who had just started his adventure towards Kakariko Village, which I'm not using to conclude Navi, don't worry. Now this is where things get awesome. This actually explains the Song of Storms. Link 1 pulls the Master Sword from the first time, as Link 2 gathers a few tolls. Link 1 created a new timeline the minute he pulled the Master Sword from its pedestal. Therefore, he would not have appeared 7 years later to Link 2 in Hyrule. He would have simply, at the end of his journey, been returned to the same point that this Link 2 was returned to, thus making the two of the timelines that exist. One of the items Link gathered after beginning his search for Navi was the Eye of Truth, which he would have had to use the Song of Storms inside the windmill to receive. While Link knew Navi, and his next task was to meet the princess, he assumed he would find her there. However, Navi wasn't there, and Link had a big story to tell Zelda about his apparent dream. During this time, as he got returned to his original time, he walks around with Zelda in Hyrule discussing the depth of his apparent dream before it fades away to being a fuzzy memory. As Link told Zelda his story, she finds it strange that Navi would leave before helping Link explain to the princess exactly what happened. The Song of Storms was another fuzzy memory Link had of the future, and Link actually learned this from the Composer brothers. Link, too, after talking to Zelda in Hyrule Castle, heads off for Kakariko Village for the Lens of Truth, as he had a memory of the well. Link asks the Composer brothers of a song that could drain the well, which they then teach to Link. Thus, they recognize Link 1 during his first visit to Kakariko Cemetery, and the man in the windmill is correct about Link teaching him the Song of Storms in the past. Young Zelda probably thought that it was best for Link 1 and Link 2 to not meet, as it could cause Link 2 to not exist if things don't go exactly how they did. Link 1's original timeline was the future we see with Ganondorf, while Link 2 was put into Link 1's timeline, now having the ability to exist during the 7 years he was once frozen, and change the events of the future, creating the second timeline. I want to mention that Egos is in fact a Hylian name and means king, suggesting that Egos Duikana and his servants are indeed Hylian. This also suggests that his name would be King of Ikana. I'd also like to mention that during the scene where the Ego servants die, they have a brief cutscene where they are shown bickering at each other about who the best swords master was between them. The only other people we see bicker before floating off to heaven are Kotake and Kuame from Ocarina of Time. I believe this is a little Easter egg we missed as kids, that all parents bicker, as Kotake and Kuame are Ganondorf's parents or creators, while the Ego servants, in my theory, are Link's parents. It's also important to note that if Link 1 has yet to collect the other two spiritual stones, that means that the Happy Mask shop has not opened yet. According to my theory, at the time Link 2 was sent back to, the Happy Mask salesman was not in his shop yet because he was out searching for more answers on who he was, as he couldn't even remember his name, and he'd been searching for nearly 10 years for answers. 10 years ago, he was the child released when the Song of Healing was played by the Four Sisters when Link was still a baby. The memories he had left were very vague, due to the entity taking his memories as he asked for answers. The boy knew two things, that he loved the forest and used to wear a mask. He first got the idea to search for his true identity in the forest. The boy knew the exact path leading to the forest temple, oddly enough, almost as if he chose to keep that memory. The boy entered the temple, and although he searched high and low, he couldn't seem to figure out all the secrets, as it had many puzzles within, on top of the fact that the place was littered with enemies. He decided to head home. On his way back through the forest, he noticed a Deku shrub leap into a hole in the ground. The boy had a very vague memory of these creatures and decided to follow it. The boy dropped down into the hole and was met with a massive amount of Deku shrubs, which all danced around the boy, seemingly praising him. In the middle of the room was a totem pole wearing the skull mask that he sensed a strange connection with. However, he knew it wasn't his mask. At this point, he knew masks were going to lead him to the answers he sought, and that he needed to find his old mask. While staring at the skull mask, the boy started remembering the power he once used on the re-dead masks. So he began carving masks one by one, putting a minor curse on each of them that would allow him to see through the eyes of its wearers, so he'd have eyes in many places at once, which could lead him to his mask. However, he needed to set up a shop in order to distribute the masks. He decided to open a Happy Mask shop and sell these cursed masks with only one rule to the shop. We do not sell masks here, we loan them. You take the mask for free, sell it somewhere far from Hyrule, and return the money to me. This was his way of spreading the masks out instead of one person from Hyrule buying them all and not adventuring with them. Shortly after Link 2 was returned to the past, the Happy Mask shop was fully functional, and Link 1 assisted in moving quite a few masks for him, the most relative to the story being that of the Skull Mask, which Link 1 gave to Skull Kid. More on this later. The next part of the story goes as follows. Shortly after the events of Ocarina of Time, Zelda once again entrusts the Ocarina of Time to Link, and he begins his search for his long-lost friend Navi. After a quick stop at Kakariko Village to request the hookshot from Dompe, which he remembered, and obtain the Eye of Truth from the well, which he also remembered, he finally stops at Lon Lon Ranch to request the assistance of Epona before making his way towards the Lost Woods, which is the first place he decided to search for many good reasons. Link 2 knew that these tools would be useful in his search for Navi. She was the only one who could maybe remember more about the future Link just saved, as she was his closest friend. When you consider that while Ganondorf may plan on freeing Volvagia to eliminate the Gorons, or freeze Zora's domain to take care of the Zora, he hasn't done it yet, giving Link no reason to rush to either of those dungeons or the Spirit Temple. Bongo Bongo is not an immediate threat either and can be put off for a while as well. The Forest Temple, however, is later used for Ganon's Phantom, which brings up a boatload of questions, but I'll get back to this later. Anyhow, it's probably worth exploring before Ganondorf gets a hold of it. Link searched for Navi in the Lost Woods until stumbling upon the Forest Temple. He decides to clear the dungeon while he's searching, only something's different this time. There's something darker about it than he remembered from the future. In the future, the 4 flames were already lit when Link showed up, before the ghosts quickly put out the flames and returned to their paintings. However, this time, the flames are not lit at all. A few years ago, Ganondorf, having heard about the rumors of the Sacred Realm due to the war on the Sacred Realm that everyone was talking about, which was caused by Majora, decided to search the Forest Temple for clues. On his journey, with a few minions of his, he noticed as it became nighttime seemingly out of nowhere, when it was still far too early it seemed. Ganondorf arrives at the temple after a long adventure through the Lost Woods, and although unsuccessful in finding the lower chamber, he did find the Composer brothers, who were still alive at this point. They had also went to the Forest Temple, hoping to complete the mystical songs they've been trying to decipher for so long. Ganondorf, curious of what they're up to, finds them practicing the Sun Song on Astolphos, seeing if it would put its soul to rest. Having witnessed this with his own eyes, Ganondorf tries to get all the information out of them that he can about the mystical song he just watched them play. The Composer brothers were far too loyal to Hyrule to give up any information though, and decided to fight Ganondorf instead, knowing that they'd be killed in the process. One of the songs that the brothers had created before ever setting off on their adventures was the Nocturne of Shadows, which, as we all know, teleports them to Kakariko Cemetery. After Ganondorf had left the temple, believing that they were dead, one of the brothers still clung to life and began playing the Nocturne of Shadows while holding on to his brother. In his last moments, he had inscribed a song on a nearby tombstone. A sacred chamber underneath the cemetery was created in honor of their memory. Anyhow, back to our hero. As Link starts his way through the dungeon, remembering what he could along the way, Link completes the dungeon as he did before, obtaining the hero's bow and defeating all four sisters, leaving only the underground portion of the map left to discover. He noticed a couple extra mini-bosses during this time throughout the dungeon. This time he encounters an Igor, a Death Armos, and an Iron Knuckles, which were left here from Ganondorf's visit years back. After solving the puzzle in the lower portion, Link heads into the final room of the dungeon where he once fought Phantom Ganon in the future. Link sees what he believes to be a heart piece in the center of the platform, and a statue of a man he didn't recognize, although the man had very similar clothing to himself. Could he have been from the Kokiri forest? Link wonders. As he approaches the altar, he's met face to face with Goms, who blocks his path. Link finds himself powerless to defeat Goms and manages to barely escape before being killed. Link, having a distinct memory of using light, fire, and ice as weapons in the future, decides to himself that it is the only way to get through Gom's Cloak of Bats and retrieve that heart piece, which is actually how Goms is defeated in Majora's Mask. He's one of the few enemies that requires the light arrows to defeat, suggesting he's pretty powerful. Link decides to return to Hyrule once more to ask Zelda about the light arrows, which she then gives to Link. Just in case this doesn't work, Link asks Impa to disguise him as a female, similar to how Sheik appeared to be male, so he can travel to Gerudo Village to obtain the ice arrows, as he remembers which doors to use the keys on to obtain the ice arrows most efficiently. When he gets to the end of the dungeon, to his surprise, the chest has 100 rupees instead. He decides to leave and stop at Lake Hylia, where he once found the fire arrows in the adult timeline. He notices a Wizrobe at the far end near the tree. It's important to note that in Majora's Mask, Wizrobe is an ice spellcaster mini-boss that is battled twice in the game, and was probably the most difficult mini-boss for me to tie to the story, but here's my theory. He awards the fire arrows when defeated in Majora's Mask. Wart, on the other hand, awards the ice arrows in Majora's Mask, and was said to be the protector of the Great Bay Temple at some point, but became evil. I think Wart was the guardian of the Water Temple in Hyrule, and Wizrobe brought him under his control and pulled him from the temple. I believe in the adult timeline, they were defeated by Gerudos in their assault on Hyrule, and while they collected the ice arrows from Wart, which are later found in their fortress, Wizrobe teleported himself to the morning sun with the fire arrows. Also, in the adult timeline, this would explain the draining of the lake and the disturbance within the Water Temple. Wizrobe mind-controlled its guardian, and were slain by Gerudo and Pals, which left the Water Temple open to any creatures who seeked entry. I believe after collecting the ice arrows, they make them the new prize for their trials, explaining why they're found in the Gerudo Fortress in Ocarina of Time. Anyhow, Link approaches Wizrobe and Wart. Link defeats them both easily and collects both the fire and ice arrows. He thinks to himself that surely he's ready to take on whatever that spirit was inside the Forest Temple, and sets off on Epona. It's worth noting now that Link has all the tools seen in Majora's Mask. Besides the bombs, but those could easily be explained with finding them in Kakariko Village, or there could be an earlier point that he probably knew where to get the bomb bag in Hyrule Castle. So he sets off on Epona. Link stops at the potion shop and changes back into his regular clothes before making his way to the Forest Temple. With a light arrow drawn, Link enters the temple and makes his way down to the secret passage to the basement. As he approaches the altar, he notices that the heart piece and Goms are nowhere to be found this time. If Link would have destroyed Goms and destroyed the green orb inside him, which I think is his phylactery, I believe he's like a lich, he would have ended the curse on the forest, according to my theory. However, Link shrugs it off and continues his search in the Lost Woods for Navi. Now I must answer the question of what happened to the heart piece, aka Majora's Mask. After Link handed off the skull mask to the Skull Kid, Link 1, that is, he followed Link to the Forest Temple, curious of what he was doing. Link 2. The Happy Mask Salesman, watching through the eyes of the Skull Kid, through his newly obtained mask, had set off for the Forest Temple in search of his mask, now that Link was there to clear it out. It's been 10 long years, but he will finally have the answers he seeks. The Happy Mask Salesman sets out for the Lost Woods, and soon arrives at the Forest Temple. Only he beat Link to the area because Link was busy gathering the elemental arrows after his first encounter with Goms. As the Happy Mask salesman sees the four torches lit and an elevator in the middle of the room erected from the ground, he heads down the elevator and makes his way to the secret room hidden within. He cannot believe what is in the middle of the altar. It's the mask he'd been searching for so long. As he happily put the mask on his backpack and headed out the elevator, he was confronted by Goms. "Ah, you've returned at long last, my lord. I am happy your plan worked," says Goms. Majora smiles intently, as he's finally collected the first step towards Godom. As the salesman comes in contact with Majora's Mask, he gained all his memories back. Now all he needed was a hero strong enough to defeat the spirit within the mask for the next part of his master plan, which Goms and the spirit within the mask have been working on for years through Link. More on this later. With the assistance of Goms' control of the Skull Kids in the forest, he allows one of the Skull Kids to access Termina, where he makes friends with the four giants, who are currently in Clocktown. Skull Kids are usually lighthearted and full of joy. Majora needed to bring out the darkness in a Skull Kid in order for Majora's Mask to be used by him. While Kid is enjoying his time with the giants, Majora had added 4 more cursed masks to Termina's plethora of masks. These 4 masks were the masks of his 4 friends he had once stumbled into the forest with on that fateful day. He put a terrible curse on each mask and sent them to the 4 edges of Termina, which began causing chaos in Termina. The 4 giants leave Clocktown, making Skull Kid upset, in order to deal with this new evil in Termina. The 4 giants, although in complete control of Termina, were each imprisoned by the cursed masks temporarily, holding back their powers, and allowing Skull Kid to terrorize Clocktown. Majora and Goms draw Skull Kid to him and allow him to steal the mask. Thus, the Happy Mask Salesman, Link, and Skull Kid are in the Lost Woods, and the Skull Kid takes the mask, bringing about the events of Majora's Mask. The mask at this point latched onto Skull Kid, who was familiar with the land of Termina. Upon Skull Kid's first visit, people that Skull Kid had met before, although not many, he also noticed were in Termina. Termina was meant for 2 purposes. Firstly, as a world of paradise to one day be completely controlled by Majora, and the second, to have the demonic entity within Majora's Mask destroyed by the fierce deity. He cleverly had the demonic entity destroyed by the fierce deity, even having Majora hand-deliver the fierce deity's mask to Link to wear and destroy it with. There were 2 reasons why he needed this to happen. First, he needed to soothe the fierce deity's thirst for souls, as its powers have been abused and it requires its debts to be paid. This would later allow Majora to wear the fierce deity's mask without being consumed by it, as he feared equipping the mask would consume his soul because he's technically the one who made the deal at the altar in the first place. The second reason Majora needed the fierce deity to defeat the demonic entity within the mask is because the side effects of abusing the deity's powers lied within Majora's Mask, which means he couldn't actually wear Majora's Mask without becoming the spirit within the mask, which had a whole bunch of baggage it brought to the table, such as being disfigured, pure evil, and a soul that is owned by the fierce deity in a matter of time. Therefore, Majora strategically gave Link the fierce deity's mask to wear to destroy the spirit within Majora's Mask, all the while avoiding any of the god's wrath that he once promised by using the Forest King's soul instead as fuel to feed the deity, as it was the current spirit residing in the mask. Anyhow, after the events of Majora's Mask, all 3 characters, Link, Majora, and Skull Kid, all returned to the Lost Woods, where Link would resume his search for Navi. It's never said what happens to the masks that Link collects, but the theory goes that they are bound to Termina, aka Majora's Mask. The deity's powers were no longer attached to the altar after it was trapped within the deity's mask. Before I continue with the story, the Garo Master is the last mini-boss from the Stone Temple that I didn't cover, so here's my theory. The Garo call Link a rival, which means to be exact, a person or thing competing with another for the same objective or for superiority in the same field of activity. By this definition, Nagaro wouldn't be looking to kill Link, but to best him in combat, claiming the title of Hand of the King, or as higher-ups in the Sheikah, as they would have known Link. They would have to know Link to call him a rival, or be mistaking him for somebody who apparently dresses and looks like Link, as Link is the descendant of the previous Hands of the King, in my theory, and was originally destined for that role. I believe the Garo are warriors of when the king ruled the Forest Temple, except they primarily worked for the Sheikah. Sheikah apparently all died off except for Impa by the time Link is 10. They have a unique way of dying in Majora's Mask where they bomb themselves upon being defeated. I think this is to avoid capture and torture, to never give up the secrets of the sacred realm within the Temple of Time. I believe the Redeads in Kakariko Cemetery are the Sheikah who were helping the Forest King. Several years pass by, and Link is now an adult. He, by this point in his life, has accepted that Navi would probably never say a proper goodbye, and while he holds on to a glimmer of hope, it's become apparent that he'll never see Navi again. Link cleared the entirety of the Lost Woods of enemies and created a safe home for the Kokiris to live, along with his new wife, Malon. One day, Link finally receives word from Hyrule that Ganondorf is beginning his assault on the Sacred Realm, which he only knows due to the rumors of the war on the Sacred Realm. Ganondorf, blind to any threats, gains entry into the Sacred Realm as he cleverly obtained the 3 spiritual stones, and like the events in the future, the Triforce splits into 3 pieces. Link had no need to pull the Master Sword in this timeline until now. Therefore, the Kokiri Emerald was instead held by Mido, while the other 2 stones remained in Zora's domain and Death Mountain respectively. Now that it's been years, and Link is an adult who can wield the Master Sword without being frozen in time, Link once again pulls the Master Sword from its pedestal in the already open Door of Time and manages to defeat Ganondorf. Ganondorf is imprisoned in the Sacred Realm and chained to a rock for the rest of his life to avoid the side effects of the Eternal Curse, which would reincarnate him when he dies into another entity who would just repeat the cycle, giving Link yet another Ganon to destroy. Link returns the Master Sword once again and continues his life as usual in the Kokiri Forest. About 40 more years now pass by, and Link begins to find himself getting old, and not as agile as he once was. He had 4 daughters and never was able to pass on the skills he learned along the way, which he felt slightly regretful about. He made himself some male armor which resembled a bull because of the years he spent surrounded by cows on the farm. He also wasn't as quick as he used to be, and should expect to be hit more often in combat. He was also blind in one eye now due to overusing the Lens of Truth throughout his never-ending hopes of finding Navi. Link decides one day to set off on another adventure into the depths of the Lost Woods in search of his long-missing friend Navi, assuring his family that he'd return in a few days. He passes through the bulk of the forest, easily memorizing the path until coming to an iron gate, with a maze behind it leading to the Forest Temple. I haven't been here for nearly 40 years, he thinks, as his original plans were to continue through the forest to uncharted territory. He instead decides to take a detour and look at the temple one last time. Link no longer carried a hook shot, as his armor was far too heavy to be pulled by it, so he sits down on the tree trunk and begins making a ladder out of nearby broken tree parts. He gets nostalgic memories of his time with Saria while he sits here, but she's long since stopped appearing when he called, because he couldn't really picture her face so well anymore. As his memory of her faded, so did the powers within the song. He finally completes his ladder and tells his trusty steed, a descendant of Epona, to wait for him. He enters the forest temple and slowly proceeds forward with a light arrow drawn just like before, as he remembers Goms. To Link's surprise, the elevator in the center was still accessible as the flames were still lit. During this time, a Hylian knight showed up at the Kokiri forest requesting Link be present for the end of Ganondorf, as they planned on finishing him off. After Malon notified the guards that Link traveled off into the woods, they returned to Queen Zelda and told her the news. She asks why they didn't go look for him, and decides that she's going to do it herself, accompanied by her most loyal guards, and begins her journey. Meanwhile, Link has taken the elevator to the bottom of the forest temple. As he approaches the shrine, the statue still remains intact. Seeing a statue was nothing strange to Link, as he's seen them almost every day in his youth, so he never really thought twice about this one. As Link approaches the statue of a once unfamiliar face, he now is looking into a mirror, and for the first time he recognizes his father. The statue looks sad and in pain. Link, completely understanding what he's looking at, pulls out the Ocarina of Time and plays the effigy of emptiness, hoping to free his father's spirit. Just then, a very distinct voice coming from the direction of the elevator. Hello? Link pauses for a moment in disbelief of what he's just heard. He turns as quick as he can and runs for the elevator. He looks around before running outside of the temple. He looks around again and cannot believe his eyes. Down on the tree stump, facing away, it's Navi. Link eagerly jumps off the ledge and runs down towards Navi, with tears of joy streaming down his face. Right before reuniting with his long lost friend he searched so long and hard for, Goms appears and was disguised as Navi. Don't you find it funny, Link? Says Goms. Funny how long we both searched for what we treasure most. For you, it was a beloved friend. For me, it was Gotham. You were the Link the entire time. Why do you think I named you that while I had the oh so great Deku Tree as my puppet? Says Goms. Haven't you ever wondered, how did Ganondorf even know of the Kokiri Emerald, which was a Hyrule secret? He knew the location of all three stones, which the royal family wouldn't tell just anyone. Why might this be? Link, in complete shock, continues to listen. Soon after the Great War of Hyrule involving Majora's Mask, Ganondorf, having heard rumors of the Sacred Realm, came to the Forest Temple in search of answers of the Sacred Realm. He never did find Master Majora's Mask. However, I did enlighten him on a few things, including the location of the spiritual stones. Link notices that Gom's face resembles both Majora's Mask and that wicked smile of the Happy Mask salesman. Link continues listening in disbelief to what he's hearing. Yes, I knew if he sought after the emerald that he would weaken the Deku Tree enough for me to fully possess him until he eventually died. You see, Goma was always an ally to the Deku Tree. It was not part of the curse Ganondorf had placed on him. He was the life spirit of the Deku Tree, and when you killed Goma, you killed the Deku Tree. Just as poor little Mido told you. You fool. You should have listened to your friends. Only sorry I had the nerve to defend your actions, because of the bond you shared as children. But even she eventually saw what you've done for the reality of the situation. You killed the Deku Tree. If it was up to the Deku Tree, Mido would have been the one to save Hyrule from disaster. We had to fit the mold of the prophecy Zelda foresaw about a boy and his fairy emerging from the forest to save Hyrule. A prophecy that we whispered into her ear while she slept. We'll just call it the Legend of Zelda. She was a child and didn't realize that without you, he wouldn't have breached into the sacred realm in the first place. Don't you remember what the princess told us the first day we met her? The dark clouds in my dream, they must represent that man. I told my father of my dream, however he didn't believe it was a prophecy. She was half right. Ganondorf was indeed the dark clouds in her dream, as we needed the story to be at least half true to fully gain her trust. And Ganondorf did plan to take over the world, which her father was blind to. However, her father was right about the false prophecy of the fairy boy from the forest. Haven't you ever asked yourself how the Deku Tree knew that Zelda had a dream, and the exact moment of which to send you off to Hyrule? Do you see now, Link, how you fit so easily into the picture for me? I caught glimpses of my future, and that you'd eventually be the one to free me. However, I was never able to see exactly how you managed to pull it off, so I let fate determine that. You were always the child of destiny, my destiny. Link watches as Goms begins to change shape. If only you just let the darkness consume you that day in the water temple. Perhaps you should have thought more on why you had such a great darkness lying within you. The shadow emerged from a tree, representing you, leaving the Deku Tree to die that day. Only, you had the sword which seals darkness. A boy who's devoted his life to others, but had the blood of the Deku Tree on his hands. While the Master Sword saw you as a naive child with a good heart, it also needed time to gather the sins you've committed and expel them from within. By the time you pulled the Master Sword in this time, you had long since proven yourself as an ally to the light. You were forgiven by the gods due to the good deeds you performed throughout your life. Thus, the darkness within your heart was too weak to manifest into this world. You, time and time again, could have stopped me, yet time and time again, you made me whole. Such a pure-hearted fool. I knew trusting you was the right thing to do. The Skull Kid is a product of the curse I placed on this forest, so manipulating him was child's play for me. You've succeeded where any other man would have fallen. I would have called you here sooner had I known you knew that song, but I knew you were not the type to go down without a fight. So as I practiced my skills in Termina, becoming more powerful every day, I watched as you grew old and weak. Every time I came close to bringing the full powers of the deity into Hyrule, which would allow me to control the four giants in Termina and claim the power of the deities, I would see that ridiculous statue blocking my path. I tried everything I could in my human form to break the statue, but it seemed it was bound there by a mystical force. When I was a boy, I was able to ask the entity questions, which he traded me for my own memories, which I later got back when coming in contact with my mask, which contained the deity within. 3 days is all I could hold those giants off for, and you pulled it off. If you would have failed, I would have destroyed the entire mask by having the moon fall upon the world. In other words, that deity underestimated me, and was doomed either way. Navi, Tattle, Tail, all creations of mine to guide my pawns to their proper places. Thank you, Link. You see, when you're sealed away for what felt like thousands of years, you develop a knack for patience. I patiently waited for the right ruler of my temple, with darkness in his heart, to step forward. Even then, I needed you to be taken to safety, which is why I let that woman escape into the forest with you. I watched you from afar, as I always have. You're even half blind now. You're nothing compared to your prime. While every day I grow stronger. And now, you've finally completed your task. Ganondorf is no longer a threat to me, nor is the deity I stole from. I knew if I took Navi from you after becoming so close with you, and never saying goodbye, that you'd never stop searching, which is why you fell into Termina, and is why you are here now, just as the puppet master planned while sealed away for all those dreadful years. Navi was no longer necessary in my plans after Ganondorf was defeated in the future. She was used merely to keep you alive, to further your destiny of saving Termina. You may be wondering why I'm telling you any of this. Well, you're going to have a long time to think, to say the least. Now watch as my powers reign absolute, for we are many. Goms by this point has fully taken on the form of the fierce deity, only he's got a wicked smile on his face, the same eyes and smile of the happy mask salesman. You're the only living person who knows how to access my sacred world of Termina, and are far too dangerous to my plans to let you walk free. As timeless as I may be, that ocarina of yours can be used against me. Now that I've finally got my usage out of you, you must be eliminated. Though I cannot claim your soul yet, I've already claimed your parents, and anybody else who perishes in my cursed forest. He then shows Link the captured souls of his parents, where they are shown bickering at each other in the forms of Stalfos, before he sends them back to his pocket dimension of Termina. However, I will rest easy knowing that the only one who knows my secrets will never speak again. I couldn't have done it without you. A moment goes by in silence, and like a flash of light, our hero finds himself blocking the first attack of Majora's. Link, while not as agile as he once was far stronger now and had skills that were unmatched anywhere across Hyrule, with every attack from the fierce deity being countered with an even more powerful attack from the hero of time. Majora had met a worthy opponent in Link. Although Link landed several blows that would kill any other man, Majora stood strong, almost as if he was recovering instantly from any damage he takes. You may be tough, but I've already seen you die here. Give up, says Goms. As the battle rages on, blow for blow, the hero of time is becoming very tired. There are several close calls throughout the fight, resulting in the hero's helmet being severely damaged due to beams of light used by Majora's sword. Our hero stands, completely drained of any more courage to fight. He thinks to himself about all his regrets in life, and how he and his parents were merely pawns in Majora's game from the very beginning. Navi was the voice of Majora all along, and Majora used Navi to assist Link in imprisoning Ganondorf, which he couldn't do alone, by blaming the death of the Deku Tree on Ganondorf and inspiring such a lazy boy to save the world. Destined to do the bidding of others and never a thing for yourself, says Majora. He then reveals a Triforce on his hand. It's the usual 3, except none of them are glowing. Instead, The fourth triangle in the middle of the Triforce begins glowing black. I've seen your future, for I am now timeless. Your soul will prove useful in my world. I will remain in the depths of Termina until the dawn of a new day, when I return for your soul. All Link could do was stand in regret for the years he wasted looking for something that never existed. Just know, Link, I was never a bad person. I just wanted to create a world where my friends could all play together again. Because after the deity told me the answer to my question, that the curse on the forest cannot be undone, and that it would only curse another area in Hyrule, Goms will continue bringing those who perish to Termina, where they can live forever, and always be happy. The air gets still. Link hears the words, "You've met a terrible fate," and in the blink of an eye, Link could hear his armor around his stomach get shattered. Everything got silent, and everything goes black. Link then hears a very familiar voice, yet more mature voice. He's right about one thing, you sure are lazy. Link opens his eyes, and standing in front of him, in the form of a blue-haired great fairy, is Navi. You've grown so much, Link. I am so proud of all your achievements. Although if I said goodbye back then, you probably wouldn't have made this forest such a great place for the Kokiri to thrive. We fairies can only grow when we're hidden, and while there's much to say here, unfortunately we haven't much time left together. The power I gained as a great fairy gave me the ability to freeze time momentarily, and then I could send you a few seconds into the past. Link, everything he said was a lie. Don't let him get into your head and discourage you. He knows that is the only way to defeat you. But he didn't count on me being here. I've never stopped watching you, Link. You've protected everyone so many times, and now I can finally protect you. Nobody can defeat you, Link. You're the hero of time. Never forget who you are. And Link, this is goodbye. Link watches as Majora backs up a few paces before time begins flowing as normal again. Majora once again begins uttering the words, "You've met a terrible," when Link slams a Deku Seed onto the ground. When Majora opens his eyes, he notices 3 bombs around him which then go off. Majora then slashes his sword, shooting a beam through the smoke towards where he believes Link to be. When the smoke settles, he notices Link is gone. It then begins downpouring, and lightning begins striking the trees in the forest. Until suddenly, Link appears behind Majora on top of the teleport pad, Master Sword in hand, with Nehru's protection covering his body. When the bombs exploded, he didn't hear Link quickly play the Prelude of Light. Link managed to land a blow with the Master Sword, and this time he noticed that Majora wasn't recovering. The greatest battle ever witnessed in Hyrule began taking place, with Navi giving Link an apparent second wind in his battle. Majora tries retreating to Termina several times, but each time Link plays the Song of Time in the perfect tone, reversing time a few seconds each time, essentially forcing Majora to battle him. Link knows that if Majora escapes, he can wait out the rest of Link's life to survive and cannot afford to let him escape. The battle continues for quite some time, until they are both exhausted. They both let out a fierce battle shout before charging at each other and exchanging blows one last time, which led to Majora collapsing, as Link managed to block Majora's final blow and stuck the Master Sword straight through Majora's chest. Majora's body then turned into the mask, and Majora was dead. Link drops to his knees while breathing heavily. Link lays down and begins coughing out blood, as he's been doing for the past few weeks. As it would turn out, Link has accepted his fate weeks before ever setting out on that adventure. Although he never told his family, he was inclined to tell Queen Zelda, as it was important to know when to execute Ganondorf. Link comes in and out of consciousness a couple times. The final time, he sees Queen Zelda casting a spell on him, while crying. She says the words, "In the name of Goddess Hylia, I offer this. May the divine protection of the Triforce be with you always." When Link awakens, he looks around himself, noticing that he is now in the Sacred Realm, completely alone. Suddenly a figure appears before him. This is where he meets the hero of legend who finally fills him in on all the details about the eternal curse with Ganondorf, and he must pass on his skills before moving to the next world. You, my distant descendant and previous wielder of the Triforce of Courage, rise and listen to the story I'm about to tell you. Zelda had sacrificed her own life and position as the seventh Sage of Light to grant you the powers of a Sage of Light. Much like Rauru and his ability to become an owl in the real world, even though his spirit resided here, you were given the same ability. Although Rauru was only able to speak to you through his owl form, known as Kaepora, because you were a future Sage of Light, you will not be able to communicate with people how you once did, except a future holder of Sage's power. The reason I appear before you is to inform you of terrible news. When you and Zelda died simultaneously, Ganondorf was too on the verge of death, as the six sages were finally putting him to bed. Just before delivering the final blow to Ganondorf, the entire Triforce lit up on his hand. This is because he once tried to claim the Triforce, but it split into three, as you know. When you and Zelda died, it had no choice but to return to Ganondorf, thus giving him the power to break his chains and destroy one of our sages, in a cruel twist of fate. Before he could fully use the new powers of the Triforce, the other five sages imprisoned him into the Twilight Realm. But when he reawakens, you will need to teach the next chosen hero how to fight properly. When I fought Demise, I was able to defeat him and fulfill my destiny until he reincarnated through Ganondorf, and I reincarnated through you. The reason your duty must continue is because you fought this version of Ganondorf, and until he's laid to rest, you cannot rest either. They must teach our descendant how to fight Ganondorf, as you did twice now. For this is the duty of the cursed. The hero then vanishes without a trace. Link spends years roaming around Hyrule, unable to interact with any of his friends. The only friend he still had was the Skull Kid, who later sees the hero of Twilight as a wolf and decides to guide him on his journey from time to time. Skull Kid must have known that this was no ordinary wolf due to his interactions with the hero of time for all these years. In the adult timeline, Ganondorf finds Majora's Mask hidden within the temple after gaining access to the Sacred Realm, but destroys it before it can ever be used. As Goms confronts him and tries to stop him, but is inevitably forced to retreat. He also destroys the statue in the center. He keeps his phantom here to prevent anybody from speaking with the Sage of the Forest on the altar and claiming the Forest Medallion. It's also a gateway to the Sacred Realm, so he needs to keep it under check. The Deku Sprout, or New Deku Tree, says that Link and Saria broke the curse on the Forest Temple, therefore he can grow and flourish. While Ganondorf's curse was in effect, Gom's powers were suppressed, which is why there are no Stall Kids in Hyrule Field in the future. It's also worth noting that Ganondorf calls his own phantom useless when Link kills it in the Forest Temple in the future. I believe this could have been the captured spirit of Gom's, and not his own powers. Forest Temple in Ocarina of Time is used as a place to celebrate Saria, which was the technical birthplace of the Great Deku Tree, according to my theory, and she acted as a way for the Deku Tree to communicate with Goms, as she loved playing the melody of the forest, which is known to communicate with spirits of the forest. I believe that the Kokiri are not in Termina because they are protected by the Great Deku Tree and fairies from any type of curse, even curses based on memories. Anyways, to conclude this story, the corpse of the hero of time was left alone near his favorite tree trunk, which has long since rotted until just a tiny portion of the trunk remained intact. In fear that they may disturb whatever spells that Zelda placed on him, Hyrule blocked off this location to anybody except his family and close friends. With all the frequent visits from all his loved ones, who would constantly bring him Deku flowers, a tree began to grow where his corpse was. A tombstone was placed in Kakariko Cemetery, with all of Link's childhood equipment being buried there. The tree Link is buried near later becomes the Forest Temple of Twilight Princess. The hero of time, forced to watch his family move on without him, and everybody he knows eventually pass away without ever getting to say goodbye, waits endlessly for Ganondorf to re-emerge in order to train the next hero. I hope you've enjoyed.